Join former FBI senior forensic examiners Becky Passmore and Stacey Eldridge as they dig into the world of digital forensics, one bite at a time. Now leading their own consulting firms and educating the next generation of cyber sleuths. These badass babes of digital forensics bring sharp insight, real-world case experience, and a dose of humor to the bits and bytes that build today's investigations. From deep dives into business email compromise and ransomware attacks, Becky's specialty, to cracking the complexities of iPhone forensics, Stacey's obsession, this podcast delivers insider knowledge for professionals, students, and true crime techies alike. If you've ever wondered what really happens when the digital trail is all that's left, tune in and start parsing the truth.
Welcome to Parsing the Truth, one bite at a time. I'm Stacey Eldridge, and with me, as always, is Becky Passmore. And this podcast focuses on digital evidence, forensic examinations, and the real stories about what happens behind the keyboard and inside the courtroom. Let's dig into tonight's episode. Becky, what are we talking about tonight?
Well, tonight we are going back the case of the people of California versus Michael Joseph Jackson. The morning of March the 23rd, 2005, court proceeding began without the jury present. The judge has been told there's been a matter that needs to be discussed before the jury enters the room. Mr. Sanger, for the defense, states that he wants to exclude the computer testimony on the grounds of relevance and lack of foundation. So this tells us that the first witness of the morning was likely whoever was going to testify on the digital evidence found the computer. And they also refer to him as an expert in the transcripts, but they never name names. And keep in mind, there were 16 different computers seized from Neverland Ranch that day.
And Mr. Sanger continues that the district attorney has focused on 4 computers and that they provided them with the exhibits they wanted to introduce via email and via hand delivery around 6:30 or 7 p.m. just the night before.
Yep.
The exhibits were taken from the multiple CDs that were disclosed as part of discovery. So it's not a discovery violation like we were talking about last week. It's just now the defense is finally seeing what the exhibits are and what they're pointing to, and now they know what the prosecution's theory is.
Right. Sanger continues that none of the 4 computers contains any material relevant to the time period involved in this case. 2 of the computers have material from September of 1998, and the other 2 have material from September, October, and November of 2003. He also continues that one of the computer had the date altered somehow when the material was being downloaded, and that should not have happened. And so he continues to share 3 reasons why this material should not be admitted. He says, first, there is nothing from the time period whatsoever. Second, the material isn't probative in this case. Probative meaning something that's more likely to make a fact true. Since it's not probative, it's not making the facts more likely to be true. So these images in question are cached material. He continues it could be there because someone opened a picture, an email, or would have been surfing the internet. All of the content is heterosexual, and it isn't related to this case. And then finally, he says they don't know who accessed the material, and there's no way to determine who accessed this material. He concludes that there's no probative value if you can't link it directly to Mr. Jackson or someone else in this case.
And he further shares that the material that they're trying to introduce is minuscule in comparison to all of the content on all of the computers. The data is from specific dates in September and November 2003, and someone took 4 minutes to look at something way back in 1998.
Wow. Mr. Auchincloss from the prosecution counters back that there are 4 hard drives from 3 computers from Jackson's bedroom and the private sanctuary, which is upstairs from his bedroom. They contained adult erotic materials, an Apple laptop with the text message, Michael Jackson's computer dated 10/12/1998, another text message that said Apple Heads computer, which the prosecution associated with Jackson. They found 16 pages worth of teen adult material from 1998, and he indicates that the computer experts can't tell us when the material was downloaded, that dates can be manipulated and the clock is not always accurate. If the computer battery dies, the clock can go off, and that's some of what the expert witness testimony would discuss. It was downloaded prior to the time the victims were at Neverland, and the computer in question is Sheriff's Item 346. Now remember, when we're talking about item number 346, it was a 2 gig Mac PowerBook G3 laptop from Jackson's bedroom.
And I think here, I'm going to give everyone a cheat sheet. If you want to, as you're listening, jot this down so you can try to keep track, because it gets confusing at one point, because we're talking about exhibit numbers, the sheriff office numbers. Thank goodness they don't mention any of the LA FBI numbers. But so exhibit 626 goes back to sheriff's office item number 346, which is that 2 gig PowerBook G3 that Becky just mentioned. Exhibit 627 is sheriff's office number 344, which is a VIO desktop. And we believe it to be a Windows desktop because, I mean, it says VIO. I mean, it could be Linux, but the odds are it's Windows, right? Then there's exhibit 628. Here's where it starts getting confusing, which has sheriff's item number 347A, which is a 40 gig PowerBook G4. But as I went through the transcripts, they keep referring to it as a desktop, and then they say it has 2 hard drives. So I think there's some confusion there. Some wires got crossed somewhere, because a PowerBook G4 is a laptop. It can only have 1 hard drive. I did look that up. And then the next exhibit is number 6, which references sheriff's office number 347B, which is a 20 gig PowerBook G4. And there's some other confusing stuff that comes associated with it. And so I don't know if it's because it said like 347A and 347B that they thought that's 2 hard drives from the same computer, and that's how they thought they split it. But again, maybe it was just 2 laptops in 1 box that was, booked into evidence at Santa Barbara. So I don't know, but both of them, and it was consistent in all the FBI things that we could see where it said they were both PowerBooks G4s of different sizes. So good luck keeping it straight, people. It gets confusing. Buckle up. All right. So let's go into the next item. So this is Sheriff's Item 344, the VIO desktop. This VIO desktop was not listed anywhere in any of the CART documentation that we could see. And because of that, and it's a VIO desktop, we think it's a Windows computer. And because it is Windows, we think perhaps Santa Barbara actually examined this device themselves. They continue that the computer is linked to Marcel Jackson, which the prosecution believes is the computer username for Michael Jackson, and it held 1,700 downloaded photos of adult erotic material. And they wanted to show several pages that actually showed the porn websites that the images were downloaded from.
The final computer is Sheriff's Items 347A, which is a Mac PowerBook G4 from Jackson's bedroom. It contains a 40 gig hard drive and a 20 gig hard drive.
Okay, take off the and the 20 gig hard drive. Thought I caught all my once I sussed it out.
It contains 40 gig hard drive. They state it appears to be quite old and could be the computer referred to by Star Arvizo when he said there was a desktop computer at Neverland. On the 40 gig hard drive, they found a text message from King777 Tut, Privacy 969, and Big Mike. There was the construction of Michael's webpage, and it also contained adult teen materials, varsityteens.com, and downloads from adoption agencies of associated pictures of kids.
He continues that the purpose of the evidence is to provide a link between the testimony of the Arvizo brothers viewing the adult materials on the defendant's computer in the defendant's bedroom, and they also want to show that Jackson knows how to use a computer, that he had 4 in his bedroom, and he also had another Apple computer in his office, that he knows how to use the internet, he knows how to access adult erotic material on the internet. They stress it's this circumstantial link that provides a powerful corroboration for the victim, and that these computers have ties to the defendant because they were found in his bedroom.
Yeah, so let's take a moment to just kind of break down some of both the sides' opening statements in regarding these issues, the defense says it doesn't pertain because it's not within the date ranges and it's all cached materials.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen the search warrant to say like what was in scope, but I couldn't find it. So who knows? I apparently date ranges were not a problem. That comes up later in LA where things get really crazy and restrictive, but apparently not in 2005. So going back to the case, the prosecution is claiming, what they've just said, that 347A and 347B are two different hard drives. And I corrected it to what it should really be when we were sharing this, but during the testimony, they said that it's two different hard drives from one computer and that it's a desktop. But according to the cart service request, it's two individual PowerBooks, so laptops. So, and again, we kind of discussed this already, like, why are those designations? And really, computer evidence is still kind of new, so I'm not surprised he doesn't know the difference, like between a PowerBook and a desktop and all that different stuff. But those PowerBooks don't have second hard drives. So either CART screwed up the labeling in the service request entries, and it's also written wrong in the report, or the prosecution just misunderstands what the devices actually are. They misunderstand the reasoning behind the A and the B.
Yeah, it will get hard to follow because we have the sheriff's numbers, the FBI numbers, the exhibit numbers. So yeah, your cheat sheet and maybe some links to all this information for our listeners.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the testimony. So Mr. Sanger, for the defendant, begins that there's nothing illegal on these computers in question, and what is the probative value of all this stuff if it's lawful material? And he continues that this material was not downloaded, it was in the cache, and it's an important distinction. He explains that means that whenever you're on a computer and you open something, a picture pops up on your screen, even if somebody sent you an email or if it's one of those automatic nasty things that gets sent to you, that photograph, that image, it's automatically cached on your computer. 15 years ago, or maybe 20, when we were going to have images downloaded off of the internet, it was too slow for the computers to go back and look at the image anew and create all the pixels to show it to you on the screen. So therefore, when people look at the picture or when it just comes up, whether you look at it or not, it just comes up on the screen. You go to something else, that image is automatically cached. And that is the part of the computer where most of this stuff was found.
So for back in 2005, I think this is pretty good explanation of what internet cache is from an attorney. And the fun fact is that the first web browser was called World Wide Web and was released in 1990 and was later renamed Nexus to avoid confusion. So he's even pretty spot on with the timing too.
I wonder if the defense had their own computer expert that we don't know about.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. So he continues to stress that nobody decided to save these pictures there. It's automatically saved, and that it's an important distinction. Now, regarding the exhibit for item 346, and he's talking about the exhibit. So that exhibit number 626. So if you look at exhibit 626, which has data from 346, and you look at the pages 3 through 20 of the exhibit, it's all cached images from October 28th of 1998 between 3:57 and 4:01 a.m. And there's nothing to indicate that they entered the website. These are just pictures from the cover. If they had entered the website, there would be a lot more.
Yeah, so when he says entered the website, I think he means clicking on anything else displayed on that main page, the home page. But if it was pornographic website, then likely there's that button you have to click and say you're 18 or older to enter the website.
Yeah. And there's some discussion regarding various people that used Michael Jackson's computers. There are two different user accounts, a Dr. Black and a Marcel Jackson.
And then the judge has some questions, and Mr. Sanger indicates there may have been a contamination issue because it looks like some information from one hard drive got onto another. And this is where they're talking about item 344, which the FBI never had according to what's been released. And this is the VIO desktop. The defense continues regarding the multiple people using it as evidence or their own emails.
But then on November 17th, 2003, the Marcel Jackson user downloaded a bunch of data, and that was, or I don't know, he says downloaded it. I'm not sure what he means exactly, but this was the day before the search warrant. So it's important to note that the day before the search warrant, there was activity going on this computer in question.
This episode is powered by Ace Forensics. Ace Forensics has been building computer systems since 1983, and they deliver high-performance workstations, laptops, and servers built for today's digital forensic tools. They offer unmatched value and the industry's only 5-year warranty. If you're tired of waiting on slow machines, head over to aceforensics.com for a competitive quote today and have Ace Forensics build the systems you deserve. And now, back to our episode.
Yeah. Then there's this discussion of when the RVSOs were at Neverland Ranch, and it was indicated they never came back to Neverland Ranch after March the 12th or 13th of 2003. So this activity that the prosecution is trying to introduce would have the dates, would have been after the dates in question in this case.
Now, returning back to item 347A, the Mac PowerBook G4 with the 40 gig hard drive, the defense clarifies that the witness testified that the desktop didn't work and that these two drives from 347A and 347B appear to mirror each other. There's nothing unlawful on them. And he continues that when the forensic people went to download this material, they converted the time and date to February 26th of 2004, and that there's no ability to go back and determine when those things were actually recorded in the cache, and that this date and time change happened specifically on item 347A. The website that was visited was barely legal, and it's a legal website, and they don't know when it was visited since it was associated with the date of February 26th of 2004. And based on the case notes, these items were in the FBI's possession at this time.
Okay, so discussing this date of February the 26th, 2004, how does this happen? First off, dates and times can be changed when you accidentally boot a computer or if you connect the hard drive to your exam machine without a write blocker. But for these files in the cache to all have a date of 2/26/2004, they would have had to been browsing the internet to get them to download and cache. So I'm wondering if the files in question were simply exported from the forensic tool. The files once exported could have created that date of the date they were exported depending on the tool, which could explain why all these cached files have the date of 2/26/2004. But they never got the expert on the stand, so we'll never know why those files had the date of 2/26/2004. And you can be sure if he had testified, the defense would have grilled him about those dates.
Absolutely. Then on that same 40 gig hard drive from item 347A, there are all these FOIA reports about people going to websites, but the reports didn't have any dates. Then on 347B, you have the exact same materials and exact dates and times as on items 346. Item 346 doesn't seem to be on the FBI list, but it's the same data from 346. It's somehow duplicated to 347B. So they don't know if it's contamination there or if there is some other explanation.
Yeah, so there's a lot to break down in that statement. First, let's tackle the WAF reports. We think these might be firewall logs from Mac. It was an option to enable this on a Mac if you wanted. It wasn't enabled by default, which could explain why it's only on one. Then the same exact material and dates and times on two different computers. That's weird. But here's where it gets even weirder. Item 346 is the 2 gig PowerBook 3. Then 347B is the 20 gig Mac PowerBook G4. How on earth do you have the same exact history from both devices? It's really weird. I mean, I could see how a portion of 346 could end up on 347B since it's smaller. Did the user upgrade from 346 to 347B? But would there have been some sort of mechanism to transfer all your files over, including your internet history.
Yeah, because I mean, even if there is some sort of file transfer thing that you could have used on your Mac, generally it's like for your personal files. It's not going to bring over like all those system files, which internet cache would be considered to be. Or is another explanation something was simply mislabeled on the derivative evidence? You know, or even the exhibits itself, because it can certainly happen if you're making exhibits quickly, especially if it's the night before your expert is meant to testify.
Yeah, and the defense continues to argue the probative value is extremely weak and doesn't tell anything about the events of the case or the testimony of the witnesses.
The prosecution argues that the defense is arguing it's just coincidence, that the computers, just by coincidence, have teen erotic material on them, that they were found in his private sanctuary, his bedroom, and that the Arvizos were shown erotic materials in Jackson's private bedroom.
Yeah, and the court asks how they could have been shown these materials. The prosecution answers, we're not saying that they were shown these materials. It's conceivable and possible that the computer from 1998 has information on it that was shown to these children. Gavin Arvizo took the computer he viewed the images on in Jackson's bedroom, but it was ultimately returned to Jackson after it broke, and perhaps that computer was discarded. Gavin didn't select the older computer, item 346, out of a lineup.
Gavin did. It sounded like you said did not.
Gavin did select the older computer, item number 346, out of a lineup.
The prosecution concludes that this is circumstantial evidence that the defendant views teen pornographic or erotic materials on the computers in his bedroom, which is one of the most important aspects of the case. In these cases, it's always a matter of credibility of the young victims, so corroboration is always highly probative.
Yeah, and the prosecution then clarifies some details regarding the exhibits. In Exhibit 626 from item 346, this includes the Netscape history showing the sites that were most recently viewed, and some are in 2001 and 2002.
The court replies, the testimony wasn't that he went online, he being Michael Jackson. The testimony was that someone else went online. And the prosecution replies it was Frank operating the computer, but it's our position that Mr. Jackson was showing the porn to these children.
The court also asks if they have another witness they can put on because he has some reservations about allowing the evidence in. He's not prepared to rule on it yet, but he's leaning toward excluding it.
Later that day, the judge released his ruling, and here's the ruling. The court will grant the defense's motion not to allow the evidence in. The primary reason is it does appear to be cache material. There wouldn't be any way of knowing whether anyone looked at it or not. It doesn't seem to be material as it doesn't relate to the time area that I'm talking about. So ultimately, none of this digital evidence got in. None of it was testified about. No one from CART testified, but I'd like to close with some discussion about the case in general, some of the things we found out, and then we can even talk about some of the statements that are widely found on the internet that say things like, the FBI didn't find anything. So I first wanted to explore the idea or the statements of people that they make, FBI didn't find anything. I think that largely comes from the FOIA requests, where you can see the portion of those 18 pages of notes from the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Office person who said, like, for the different search hits, nothing found, nothing, but there was some redacted stuff. So I personally think that's where that comes from. But Becky, do you have other ideas or thoughts on why people say the FBI didn't find anything?
I think I'd like to go back and remind everyone that this was very early on. Like, computer evidence and digital evidence just started touching the surface. And 1996, 1997. So, approximately 7 years before is where it's first being looked at, and how to preserve the evidence and how to document the evidence. I remember in 2006 when I went to moot court, we had a very organized moot court, but I think that had only come on the last few years. So this time frame this was very new when it comes to evidence, very new to how do you get it into court, very new to judges understanding what digital evidence is, very
Yep.
new to prosecutors and defense teams understanding what it is. And those theories of, well, malware could have done it, or it's all cached material, it's not legitimate active files because it's in the internet history. Those were the common defense approaches back then. And so I think they were using anything that they could pull out of the air to keep this evidence out because nobody really knew how to talk about it. They didn't know how to question the experts. And so I think, had this case been adjudicated 10 years later, looked at differently, I think we might have had a judge that would have understand what this digital evidence was, maybe even prosecutors or defense that could explain it better. So, the FBI didn't find anything. I wouldn't go so far to say they didn't find anything based on some of the statements and the information that they listed here, but that didn't find anything. Was it enough? Was it enough to show it was CSAM material?
Yeah. Or anything related to the charges of the case, because typically when you have like anything involving child molestation, the odds are that they're probably also looking at it on their digital devices. They're probably also hoarding it on their digital devices. So it makes sense to look for those sorts of things. And to the defense's point and the judge's point, it wasn't really within the date ranges because they're saying some of this stuff was either really, really old. So like 1998, the victim wasn't there then. And then other stuff in late 2003, the victim wasn't there then either. So then that would not support the victim's statement that he was shown pornography in Michael Jackson's bedroom. They mentioned that he took the computer, but that it broke and they don't know where that computer is. So maybe,
And we also have to
they did go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we also have to remember there was a lot of people in and out of Jackson's house. So
Oh, yeah.
were these user accounts locked down? Were they password protected? Were there other people that had access to use these computers, especially even the kids, the young men that were being shown these computers? Were they able to access the computers without password protected accounts?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, we just don't have any of those details. And it would have been interesting to see somebody testify about all of this stuff. Was there stuff that they were going to have him testify about that would have built up to that and said, "Oh, all of these accounts are password protected," or maybe they weren't, but and there was also some discussion about like the text messages. Well, I don't think he meant like text messages like we're thinking of them today. I think he probably means more like internet chats, like instant messaging like you used to do over like AOL and AIM and
Sure.
Yahoo Messenger, stuff of that nature. Didn't Mac have a messaging platform too?
I think so, and I, for the life of me, can't remember it.
So, but like if you're on a Mac, then you could talk to your other Mac friends on your
Sure.
Mac messaging
Yeah.
platform.
Mhm.
So there's all sorts of stuff to do there. But I mean, the FBI found something. They created derivative evidence of results CDs. Now, we know some of this stuff was outdated. What were some of the other things? Because there were 16 computers. They only talk about 4 different items here, but there was pretty much results from all 12 of them. And then the one that had the 4 DVDs made of the exported graphics, they didn't even talk about that in any of this testimony, that they wanted to include anything from that. So I thought that
Right.
was interesting.
Sure. Yeah. So just a very interesting case, and the fact that there's a lot of, like you said, about 50% of it that has been released, redacted, not all of it's present. So,
Yep.
being able to come to some conclusions here as to that the FBI didn't find anything, I think it's a little harder to get there if we don't have all the reports and information provided.
Yeah, certainly. But it is an accurate statement that there was no digital evidence produced or discussed during the trial.
Yeah.
So,
That's right. So that's it
and
for
now
this
we know why it got tossed.
That's exactly right. So that's it for this episode of Parsing the Truth One Bite at a Time. Support the podcast by joining the Patreon. You'll get some cool perks and exclusive members-only merchandise and a discount at the merchandise store. Or head over to the merchandise store for some swag. We'll have links in
Yeah.
the show notes. Thanks for listening. Until next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and as always, keep parsing the truth one bite at a time.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us to get notified the next time a new episode drops. If you can do more, head on over to parsingthetruth.com and donate by clicking on the donate button. Parsing the Truth is a nonprofit organization, and we are raising money to send a new digital forensic examiner to IASIS training next year in Orlando. Thanks.